While American warships sat outside the Strait of Hormuz and U.S. tanker captains were being told by Donald Trump to show some guts and sail through, Chinese tankers were moving freely, not occasionally, consistently. Since February 28th, approximately 11.7 million barrels of Iranian oil have passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Every single shipment went to China. Every single transaction was settled in Chinese yuan. And while tankers from Japan, South Korea, Europe, and India sat anchored outside the strait with rising insurance costs and no safe passage, the yuan-denominated supply chain kept moving without interruption. Then a senior Iranian official told CNN something that reframed the entire conflict. Iran would consider allowing oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point carrying 20% of the world's daily oil supply, under one condition. Oil must be paid for in Chinese yuan, not US dollars. A 14-day US military campaign had not reopened the strait. One currency condition from Tehran might. If that condition becomes a precedent, the financial architecture that has underwritten American global power since 1974 faces its most serious challenge in 52 years. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Iran doesn't need to win this war militarily to permanently damage the system that funds American power. The math is already working against Washington. To understand what is happening at the Strait of Hormuz, you need to go back to 1974, and a deal that most people have never been taught in school. In the aftermath of the 1973 oil crisis, the United States struck an agreement with Saudi Arabia. The terms were straightforward. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, Washington would provide military protection to the Saudi government. Other oil-producing nations followed. The petrodollar system was born. The consequences of that deal reshaped the global economy in ways that are still operating today, because oil, the commodity every industrialized nation requires, was priced in dollars. Every country on Earth needed to acquire dollars before it could buy energy. European nations converted euros to dollars. Asian nations converted yen, won, and rupiah to dollars. African nations did the same. This created a permanent structural global demand for U.S. currency that exists independently of anything America produces or exports. That permanent demand allowed the United States to run deficits that would cripple other economies, borrow at lower interest rates than any other nation, maintain a defense budget larger than the next 10 countries combined, and enforce sanctions that could effectively cut any country off from the global economy. Here is the foreshadowing the entire story depends on. The petrodollar system has one structural vulnerability. It only works if oil must be purchased in dollars. The moment a major choke point in global energy trade accepts a different currency, consistently, at scale, with institutional support, the logic of the entire system begins to erode. That vulnerability is now being tested at the Strait of Hormuz, in real time. For 52 years, the petrodollar system held. Then the Strait of Hormuz closed, and Chinese tankers kept sailing. China has been purchasing Iranian oil in yuan for years. Under U.S. sanctions, Iran could not sell oil through dollar-denominated channels. China offered an alternative, yuan-settled transactions through CIPS, China's cross-border interbank payment system, which functions as a direct alternative to the SWIFT banking network. In 2025, CIPS processed approximately $245 trillion equivalent in yuan transactions, representing 43% growth from the previous year. The infrastructure for non-dollar oil trade was not built during this conflict. It was already operational. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, that pre-existing infrastructure became the only functioning payment rail for Gulf oil movement. Chinese tankers had clearance. Non-Chinese tankers did not. The distinction was not military, it was financial. Yuan in. Everything else, wait outside. After the U.S. struck Karg Island, which handles approximately 90% of Iranian oil exports, Iran did not stop exporting. It resumed loading tankers at the Jask oil terminal on the Gulf of Oman, a location that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz entirely for Iranian outbound shipments. The U.S. strike, presented as a demonstration of control over Iranian oil infrastructure, did not stop the yuan-denominated oil flow. It redirected it. Here's the unexpected complication the financial press has largely missed. While this was happening, the United States reportedly reversed its ban on Russian oil imports. The stated reason was the need to replace Gulf oil supply disrupted by the conflict. Russia, whose energy revenues had been a primary target of Western sanctions since 2022, was re-entering Western energy markets through the back door of a Middle East conflict that Washington initiated. Meanwhile, American tankers are being hit at approximately one per day. Pete Hegseth stated that Iran's missile capacity is down 90% and drone activity down 95%. The military campaign, by Pentagon metrics, is proceeding as planned. But the Strait of Hormuz remains closed to dollar transactions while remaining open to yuan transactions. And the Houthi movement is simultaneously escalating activity in the Red Sea, creating a second choke point disruption compounding the Hormuz closure's impact on global shipping. The military map and the financial map of this conflict are telling two completely different stories. I need you to sit with this for a moment. Because the number I'm about to give you, the one that explains what China has actually gained from this conflict, is the reason this story exists. China did not fire a single shot in this conflict. It has not deployed a warship. It has not issued a military threat. And yet China is the party that has gained the most from every week the conflict continues. When the US struck Karg Island and Pentagon officials reported Iranian missile capacity down 90%, the dominant Western narrative was clear. America was winning. The financial pressure of losing Karg Island's export revenue would force Tehran toward negotiation. Iran is currently selling approximately 1.22 million barrels per day to China, down from pre-war levels of 2.16 million barrels per day, but at heavily discounted prices that China is acquiring into its strategic reserves. China is accumulating discounted oil at scale while the dollar-denominated oil market is in disruption. Every day, the strait stays closed to non-yuan trade. More governments and energy companies are running calculations about whether yuan-based energy infrastructure is something they need to develop, not as an ideological choice, but as a logistical one. Iran's senior official told CNN that the Strait of Hormuz could reopen for yuan-denominated trade. That statement is not a negotiating position, it is a demonstration. Iran is showing every oil-importing nation on earth that there is a functional alternative to the dollar for energy transactions, that the alternative is already operational, that Chinese tankers are already using it, and that access to 20% of the world's daily oil supply could be contingent on which currency you use to pay for it. If even a handful of nations begin accumulating yuan reserves to ensure energy access, the structural demand for dollars begins to erode, not dramatically, not overnight. But structurally, at the foundation of the system, the 1974 deal created. The United States operates approximately 800 military bases in roughly 80 countries. That global presence is financed ultimately by the structural demand for dollars that the petrodollar system creates. A system under sustained pressure at its most important choke point is a different system than the one that existed before this conflict began. The financial shift is visible now. But there's one consequence of this week that the oil markets haven't fully priced yet, and it's the one with the longest timeline. The petrodollar system has survived 52 years of geopolitical shocks. What it has not previously faced is a major choke point simultaneously closed to dollar transactions and open to yuan transactions, supported by operational alternative payment infrastructure, with Chinese tankers moving freely as proof of concept, while the country controlling that choke point publicly offers to reopen it for yuan. Russia is re-entering Western energy markets through a conflict Washington launched. China is accumulating discounted oil reserves while its currency gains its first real foothold in Gulf energy transactions. Iran's nuclear material remains in deep underground facilities described as beyond the reach of current U.S. bombing operations, meaning the original military objective of the campaign remains unresolved. One thread this story cannot close: whether Iran's yuan condition for reopening the strait becomes a one-time crisis measure or a permanent feature of Gulf energy trade. Chinese tankers are still moving, American tankers are still waiting. The strait is still closed to dollar transactions. The price of oil is still climbing. This is a story about a military conflict and a financial system simultaneously, and most coverage is only tracking one of them. Subscribe if you want analysis that covers both layers, and leave a comment. Do you think the yuan can realistically replace the dollar as the primary currency for global oil trade? Or is the petrodollar system more durable than this conflict suggests? One final thing worth watching: Iran's nuclear material is stored in underground mountain facilities that current U.S. bombing operations cannot reach. What happens to the nuclear file if the financial pressure on Washington continues to build? That analysis is coming next.